Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and I want to talk to you about the case of Robert Roberson. He's in Texas. He's about to be put to death by the end of October, and there's a great outcry again. Innocence Project's involved. Even the detective that originally worked the case many couple decades ago says, "I think he's innocent," and scientists have come forward about the fact that they believe he was convicted on junk science. In this case, shaken baby syndrome, that, shake a baby and they killed the baby, accidentally shaking it. There is a claim that he's also autistic. And when he brought the child to the hospital, the people there, the detective and others, thought he didn't act appropriately. And when he brought them back to the house to show them the house, although there were no signs of homicide, he went and made a sandwich, and they thought, oh my God, that's like psychopathic as opposed to autistic. They had no clue he could be autistic. So many appeals later that have failed, he's up for being executed. And people are outraged because they're saying they are going to execute an autistic man who did not murder his child. He did not shake his baby to death. She died of pneumonia, an undiagnosed issue, a very kind of a unique pneumonia that lies deep in the lungs of babies and small children. I'm not going to get into all the scientific issues, but it does exist. And the defense has come up with, they have scientists now, doctors, who will say that's what she died of. We've looked at the samples, analyzed forensically the lung samples. We've looked at everything, the X-rays and everything else, and she did not die of shaken baby syndrome. She died of she had been sick since birth and had reoccurring fevers, and she was always sick. And at the time he just happened to be at home with her, she stopped breathing because of all these other issues. And he didn't, he's autistic, so he didn't handle it maybe as well as he could have, because people expect certain things. That's the story that's out. And it is really complicated. And I want to say it's complicated because what we have is a problem of people understanding actually factually what is true and what is not true, and what is likely and what is not likely. Okay, so I want to say up front, before I begin my analysis of everything, take you through all of this. First of all, you have to have some patience. I like to explain things. I'm not just going to give a 10-minute quick, this is my determination. I want you to understand why I'm determining anything. But most important, I'm not talking about whether you agree with the death penalty or not. I want to talk about whether he's guilty or not, and what he would be guilty of if he's guilty of anything. So let's not make this a pro-death penalty, anti-death penalty issue. Even though if you're pro or anti, that's fine. I'm just not. That's not the point of this show. I'm a criminal profiler. I'm analyzing guilt, and then what the guilt is, or the person is not guilty. And if you're pro or anti-death penalty, go for your own. Go for fighting whatever you believe in. That's okay with me. So now I'm going to take you through the things I call actual facts, because anybody who knows me knows I do not like the Innocence Project. Why? Not because I don't mind if they get innocent people off of death row. I don't mind if they point out mishandling of evidence or even corruption. I want that to be brought to light. My problem with the Innocence Project is they don't often care if the person is innocent or not. And so their reputation, in my opinion, is tarnished by the fact they're not truthful. And that bothers me. So the question is, here again, they think they're saying this guy is innocent. Is he innocent? And so whether he should get the death penalty or not, I'm going to push aside. Is he innocent or is he guilty? And what is he guilty of if he's guilty? And if he's innocent, how can we prove him innocent? So I'm going to go through all of this. If you're new to the channel, by the way, please do like and subscribe, and check my playlist because I talk about a lot of things. I'm a criminal profiler and I like to analyze cases. This is an educational channel, not a political channel, nor is it a self-crime channel. It is an educational channel. Okay, so here we go. Going to The Guardian, let me just read you the basics of the case so you know what it is. It says here as a headline, Texas death row inmate at mercy of Supreme Court and junk science. Robert Roberson was convicted of murdering his 2-year-old daughter on the basis of the now largely discredited shaken baby syndrome. All right. On a frigid evening in January of 2018, let's go. No, sorry. Let me skip through this thing that they're. Oh, okay. So she this okay, this is somebody who's trying to help him out. Okay, on January 31st of that year, Wharton was called to Palestine Hospital, Palestine, Texas. By the way, it's not Palestine. That's in Israel area, or the Middle East. Palestine is the how you pronounce the Texas town. I actually worked a case in Palestine where I learned that. So I learned how to pronounce it properly. All right. She was called to Palestine Hospital after receiving reports of a mortally ill child. Her father, Roberson, had brought his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki, into the ER in a comatose state, the little girl lying limp in his arms and turning blue. She died the following day. Wharton led the investigation. Oh, so Wharton led the investigation. Sorry, Brian Wharton. Okay. It's poorly written. So anyway, Brian Wharton. He's a detective. He led the investigation. He arrested Roberson hours after the girl died, even before an autopsy had been performed, having been advised by doctors that this was a case of, quote, shaken baby syndrome, the theory that the child had died from violent shaking that causes fatal brain injuries. Wharton went on to testify at Roberson's capital trial. The jury convicted Roberson in February of 2003 and sent him to death row. Wharton had been troubled by key aspects of the case from the start. Well, by the way, I just want to say, apparently he's what happens in a lot of these cases is a couple decades passes and the Innocence Project shows up on your door and goes knock, knock and says, hey, what do you think about this? And, when you're looking back in time, you don't have the original feeling you had about the case. You're not right there with him anymore. So now you start questioning whether you were unreasonable. Detectives do this as well as ordinary people. Some ordinary people, for example, are witnesses in crimes. But if you come after them 20 years later and say, hey, did you really see that? They're like, their mind is foggy. And then they start questioning, maybe I didn't see that. And maybe I sent an innocent person to prison. And the detectives aren't immune from that either. So apparently he's like, I don't know, maybe I was wrong about this. So anyway, why had the doctors and nurses seized on shaken baby syndrome as the cause of Nikki's injuries almost immediately? And why with such certainty? Why had a nurse told them she had found indications of sexual assault on Nikki's body when he could see no such evidence? Well, first of all, he's a detective. He's not a medical person. So, okay. Why, when he escorted Roberson back to his house on the day of Nikki's collapse, could he find no signs of a violent altercation? And I do think he found no signs of a violent altercation. I absolutely believe this is true. Why were there no marks or indentations on the wall? No holes in the sheetrock? Nothing. No blood anywhere except a few drops on a washcloth that Roberson gave him. Okay. I will agree with this. Absolutely. As I go through this, I'll tell you where I absolutely know. I agree. Okay. The child was not brutally beaten to death with fists and pummeling and so that blood would be on the walls and everywhere. No, that did not happen to this child. She was not beaten to death. There wasn't an obvious assault on the child to such an extent where you would have that kind of evidence. There was a tiny bit of blood on a washcloth, which is explained. After all, why had Roberson acted himself so strangely? As a police officer, Wharton had dealt with both perpetrators and victims of violent crimes, but Roberson's behavior fitted the pattern of neither criminal nor victim. I will disagree with that, but okay. He came across as flat, emotionless, matter of fact, as though nothing was registering with him. This is where the autism issue comes in. Now, mind you, a person who shows no compassion toward a victim, especially their own child, may be exhibiting psychopathy. Some psychopaths are real good at faking crap, and other psychopaths just come across as like whatever, because, hey, she didn't really matter to me, so why should I be upset? But it was odd. So Roberson thought it was odd. Now, all of these things bugged the former detective to the point he felt haunted by them. Well, at least haunted. I don't know that he was really haunted by them, where this becomes the media. But he has stated that he believes he is innocent. After all these years, he is now on his side. He thinks he's innocent. And I just want to point out that what you feel at the time and what you feel 20 years later can be entirely different. For example, I want to point this out because this is very true for many people. They, for example, may have a poor marriage and it's not gone well. They divorce. And about a year or two later, they go, why did I leave? Why did we get divorced? And they remember the good things and they start forgetting the bad things. So they decide they're going to get remarried. And they get remarried, and about 3 months later, like, oh my God, now I remember why we got divorced. So what happens is the mind is a funny thing. So as far as the detective goes, I would say his heart is, he's got a good heart, and he doesn't want anybody to be executed on something he's not sure about. And the defense has come up with experts to say that shaken baby didn't cause this. There's proof scientifically of this pneumonia thing that was going through her. She was ill. She was given a drug that they have taken off the market for children, a drug that probably maybe have depressed her breathing. And this guy did nothing wrong. He just found his daughter in dire circumstances, took her to the hospital, and they thought he was weird, didn't act right, so they thought he did something to her. So this detective doesn't want to see this man go to prison when he might be responsible for misinterpreting everything. All right. So anyway, this is what happened. So this is kind of funny. It says here, so when the doorbell rang and Roberson's lawyer stood before him, Morton knew exactly what to do. He says, come in, I've been waiting for you. Very dramatic, but anyway. So this is what the new, the discovery is. Nikki, who shortly before she died had been placed in Roberson's custody. Now, I want you to understand this. This is very important. Shortly before she died, she was put into his custody. She wasn't in his custody for a year and a half of her life. She had just popped into his life in the last month. She was chronically sick almost from birth. Yes, she had illnesses. In my opinion, she had, from what I can see, she had reoccurring ear infections. Some children have babies, ear infection after ear infection after ear infection, causes high fevers, causes a lot of pain. Sometimes they end up getting the surgery so they can drain the ears. And that was her main issue as far as I could see. Now, one of the things that happens sometimes when a child is not nursed and a child is not held up and fed with a bottle in a proper position, a lot of times children who are laying down and kind of left, mind you, Nikki was not with her mother. She was with her grandparents because her mother lost custody. Grandparents are taking care of her. And by the way, those grandparents sound a lot real questionable people to me. Everybody, this poor Nikki had terrible mother, terrible father, terrible grandparents. Everything was terrible. Okay. The girl had no luck. So anyway, I would think it's very highly possible, shall we say, that when she was fed as a baby or as a toddler, she was given a bottle and she was lying flat on her back, drinking the bottle like this. And what happens is then apparently the laying on your back, it's not a good thing for your ears, for a baby or a toddler. And I think probably the care she got did not help any. Now, I'm not saying that the grandparents caused her to have the ear infections. I'm just saying it's possible that the way she was cared for didn't help. Okay. So she also supposedly had suffered bouts of breathing apnea, which caused her to suddenly stop breathing and collapse. And I don't have any real good information on that. What would have? It's out there, but it's also the grandparents are bringing her in, and I don't know what occurred prior to that. Shortly before, her father rushed her to the hospital. And by the way, rushed her to the hospital, I do not think is correct, and I'll get into that. She had diarrhea for 5 days and had a fever of 104. When you have a lot of ear infections, 104 is not that unusual. People hear that and they freak out. Oh my God, no. Toddlers, 103, 104, not good, but not necessarily life-threatening either. That's why the doctors give certain medications to try to lower the fever and all that. Diarrhea, what was that caused by? Again, I don't know. The circumstances this poor child lived in with anybody she ever lived in was not good. So I don't know what she was fed, how she was cared for, what was really going on as far as anybody caring for her properly. And now it says here, so she also had severe undiagnosed pneumonia. This is coming from the defense. I want to point this out because you have to understand that I read the Supreme Court ruling, and everything in there is coming from the defense. I mean, they made their ruling, but the information about how things happened came from the defense. So they had an expert come in, one expert, and maybe there were two, I'm not sure. But, if you've ever seen a trial, you know that the prosecution and the defense can come up with experts that are totally opposing each other. So when they went for these appeals, they brought in their experts, and experts said, oh my God, she had severe undiagnosed pneumonia, not seen at the hospital at the time, mind you. But later on, a decade and a half, 2 decades later, somebody analyzed some, say, x-rays, and they also did they analyzed some specimens, and they came up with this. Now, there is such a thing, by the way, of this undiagnosed pneumonia. But here's one of the big problems. You hear this, you go, oh my God, we have to believe she had undiagnosed pneumonia. Why do you say that? Because 1 or 2 doctors might have said this is true 20 years later. Now, let me tell you a little experience I had when I was working as a sign language interpreter at the hospitals for many years. I interpreted for a woman who was getting a breast biopsy, and she had done the mammogram. And during the mammogram, if you're a lady out there, pay attention to this. If you get a mammogram done, then it's sent to the radiologist, and the radiologist looks at it, and then he makes a recommendation back to the doctor. This is what I gathered from what they said. So this woman came in to get this biopsy because the radiologist had concerns. I put quotes around concerns. What do concerns mean? It means the radiologist, in his own personal opinion, not a dozen radiologists' opinion, this one guy, he saw something in the mammogram that concerned him. In this case, it was about white spots. And if you're in this, if you're in the business of all this, don't come and attack me. But this is basically what I got out of it. There are these little white spots, little white dots. And if there's too many of them or they're too close, there might be an indication of breast cancer or a tumor. So the radiologist looks at this and he goes, I think there's too many white dots, and they seem to be too close together. So because of this, I'm concerned that this particular patient might have breast cancer, and therefore the most reasonable thing I can do is recommend to the doctor she get a biopsy to be safe. All right, what does to be safe mean? One is we don't get sued, and the second thing is we make money. And those things together promote a tremendous amount of breast biopsies that do not need to be done. Okay, but on the off chance that 1 out of these 100 women had too many white dots or too many dots close together, it might be breast cancer. We better just have all 100 do it. I went and watched this. Oh, I had interpreted for it. The woman's like lying on a table, and you have a hole in it, and you put your boob through it. It's like some medieval thing. And then the doctor sits below the boob, and he stabs the boob with a needle and sucks out stuff. And then I had never seen this before. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like going back to the Middle Ages. Anyway, they send that off to the lab. So it came back perfectly normal. So there was one radiologist who decided, I'm looking at this and this is my determination. So in this case, the issue was whether she had pneumonia or not, rather than shaken baby syndrome. And the person they found, because it's the defense, for God's sakes, this has not gone back to court. This is why I'm bothered by when things are done without actually returning to court for a new trial. If there's something new, this is what an appeal is supposed to do. If you put something out there that in the appeal process, and they go, oh my gosh, you've got something here, we need to take this back to court. Then you can get, again, the defense can say what they want, bring their experts in, and the prosecution can do the same. But when you have this information out there, and the Innocence Project takes it forward, and maybe the detective on the case is brought into it, and then the new DA, he's no longer the DA that was there 20 years ago, and he's now a progressive DA, and he wants to save people from the government doing bad things to them. So he goes and says, hey, it's clear to me the guy didn't kill her. It was a pneumonia. Based on what? One defense witness, maybe two, but hand-picked by the defense team. You can always find somebody who will come up with something. That's my point. Do I believe she had undiagnosed pneumonia? Well, at the time she was brought back to his home, it didn't appear she was in any kind. Nobody said she was having any kind of issues. She seemed pretty healthy at that moment in time. I'm not saying she was healthy generally, but just at that moment in time, she wasn't experiencing breathing problems. She seemed to be, So I can't say that the defense saying that this child had undiagnosed pneumonia is true. So that's one of the things I want to bring out right away. Next thing, she had been prescribed medications, including an opioid, that are no longer considered safe for children, as they can cause fatal breathing problems and oxygen deprivation. Okay, let's look at that. This is so important. I looked this up. This is the type of stuff that they gave her. Okay, it is called promethazine. It's also called Phenergan. That's the popular name. In late 2004, a boxed warning was added to the labeling for promethazine hydrochloride, also known as Phenergan, including a contraindication for use in children less than 2 years old. And she was just barely 2 years old. Okay, so this would apply to her. Warning, okay, this is the basis for this action. Let's look at the research behind this action. So the defense is saying the Phenergan could have killed her. In other words, she might have undiagnosed pneumonia, and then you add Phenergan, which depresses breathing. Hey, it shouldn't even been given to her. And two things are already at play here, but let's see if it's true. Promethazine is widely used in children as antihistamine, antiemetic, and a sedative. Approved in 1951. Serious and often life-threatening adverse events, including respiratory depression, oversedation, agitation, hallucinations, seizures, and dystonic reactions have been reported with promethazine use in children. Now, mind you, if you watch any of these drug commercials on TV, they always have this long list of how it's going to kill you, and you wonder why anybody would take it. Well, they always do that because even if it's pretty rare, they're still going to put it up there as a warning so that they don't get sued. Okay, so now let me tell you about the details of this research, though. It's kind of fascinating. In 2004, we reviewed, this is the FDA or whoever reviewed this, all the cases of serious adverse events reported to the FDA, not them, but whoever did the research, that involved children from birth to 16 years old. Now, here we have to look carefully at research. Birth to 16 years old. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of years, okay? Different things happen to little babies than happen to 16-year-olds. All right. Who had received any formulation of promethazine. Reports on adverse events. Now, get this. In 125 patients. All right. 125 patients under the age of 16 had adverse reactions. This happened between 1969 and 2003. Okay, let's stop here. 1969 Okay, 79, 89, 99, 2009. Okay, almost 40 years. There were 125 patients had some issues over 40 years. Can you do the math? Approximately three people under the age of 16, three had a problem every year. Three. The adverse events include 38 cases of respiratory depression or cardiac arrest. Some other had some other issue, a whole bunch of other issues, some seizure issues, blah, 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 blah. 38 had cases of respiratory depression. Only 38 over almost 40 years. Now we're down to one underage child. One per year had a problem with respiratory depression or cardiac arrest. One per year. Okay, it gets even worse. These reports included respiratory depression in 22 patients. 22 patients. So 22 patients over 40 years. One patient every 2 years. Only one patient every 2 years had a respiratory depression. These patients were from 1.5 months to 2 years of age, 7 of whom died. Okay, so 7 children over the 40 years died of cardiac arrest or respiratory depression leading to cardiac arrest. 7 over 40 years. So one every 5 years, maybe one child every 5 years died of this. Mind you, they're also saying 1.5 months to 2 years. Well, how many of those 7 kids were tiny little babies, and how many of them were 2 years? So let's say of all of those, only one was actually 2 years old. That means only one child in 40 years died from this medication. Now do you see the problem I'm talking about? So they're saying that this medication killed her, depressed her respiratory system, gave her a heart attack. But only one child in 40 years of her age was ever had a problem with it. Of all the, God knows, thousands and hundreds of thousands of children who were given this crap. I'm not saying it's good stuff, but this was like a regular thing that was given out by doctors all over the place. So yes, a lot of the doctors gave her that over and over and over again. But if only one child died in 40 years, I'm going to say the chances of her actually dying from that were really small. So this is what the defense is pushing without the research behind it, where everybody goes, oh my God, she was on this medication. Poor dad. I mean, he did what he's supposed to. The child died of this medication. Well, here's an interesting little thing that people don't know, which I read. Apparently, and I can't find much information on this, but it's in the Supreme Court ruling, the information there, that they had determined she had a toxic amount of this drug in her system, Phenergan, a toxic amount in her system. If the doctors gave her, they prescribed a certain amount. Now, the claim is not that the certain amount, well, the claim is a certain amount killed her. 1 out of 40 kids, 1 out of 40 kids, 1 kid out of 40 years died of something like this. It just happened to be her, even though it was the normal amount prescribed. But that isn't said in the information. It's not the normal amount. It says a toxic amount. And they will not put what the toxic amount is. This can be extremely important in my analysis of what I think happened. According to even the defense, a toxic amount of Phenergan was in her system. I do not believe, there's no proof she died of this pneumonia. When she went to the hospital, they didn't determine any pneumonia at the time. It's only 20 years later that they come up with a defense witness that says, "Oh, we determined this," which so what? I don't know that that's any kind of proof. I don't find any proof that she died of pneumonia. I don't see any proof that she died of the normal giving of that's the Phenergan medication by the doctors. The only thing I know so far is that she had a toxic amount of Phenergan in her system. Now what happened? Because the other claim is that he beat her or he sexually assaulted her. All right, I'm going to go back now to the Supreme Court, and I'm going to read you the factual background. Now, what's interesting about this factual background is this is actually, I'm reading it, I'm like, it seems like a defense. It seems like from the defense. It doesn't seem like it's from the prosecution. A lot of times when you read appeals, you'll see the whole prosecution's version along with the defense version. In this, I never saw the prosecution version. It was only the defense version, which I noted was kind of weird. But okay, so this is a defense version. And keep that in mind because the defense version is supposed to be on his side. All right, Nikki was born on October 20th, 1999 to Gwendolyn Michelle Bowman, who was required to relinquish custody from her hospital bed. She had a history of drug addiction and prostitution. And when Nikki was born, they'd already removed 2 other of her children from her custody. Her first child, Christopher, was born with fetal alcohol syndrome and diagnosed with narcolepsy. Her second child had both fetal alcohol syndrome and a seizure disorder. Mommy was not a person who should have had kids. So she was removed from her mother's custody because her mother was a drug addict and a complete mess. Michelle, the mother, named Nikki after her boyfriend at the time, a man named Nick Curtis, was why she's named Nikki. It was subsequently confirmed that Robert Roberson of Palestine, Texas, was actually Nikki's biological father. From the time of Nikki's birth until she was approximately a year and a half, Mr. Roberson was in prison for a parole violation arising from a conviction for writing hot checks and played no role in her care. Okay, stop right here. He has a long history from his teenage years. He's a long history. He's a repeat criminal, a lot of crimes, and he's we're not even hearing about the ones he committed they didn't get prosecuted for. He's a lifelong criminal. Okay, and he supposedly didn't do well in school. He's in special ed, and then he left. He dropped out of school, and he started committing crimes before he was 18, and he committed crimes and crimes and crimes and crimes. Okay, now let's talk about special ed because they're going to sit down. Now, what's happened is the defense has come up with the autistic label. That seems to be a new thing you can say these days and excuses you from all your behaviors. So where did this autistic label come from? And people go, oh my God, every single freaking media outlet killing an autistic man, murdering an autistic man, executing an autistic man, autistic man, autistic man, autistic man, autistic man. There's no proof that he's autistic. Never was any proof he is autistic. He got that. The defense found one person again, one expert, to do some testing on him and then claim he was autistic because he didn't act this way or didn't act that way. Claimed he was autistic. And because one psychiatrist claimed he was autistic for the defense, this is now a fact. Get out of here. It is not a fact. It's nonsense from the defense. I don't see any evidence he's autistic at all. Now, I personally think he's a psychopath. But here's the thing. I can't prove that either because there's not enough testing. But let's look back at, people will say, oh my God, he clearly was autistic because he didn't do well in school and he special ed, and they didn't understand him. Even back then, they didn't understand him. Okay. I will give you a personal story on this. When I was 23 years old, I met a man from Jamaica. He was 19. He became my husband. When we were dating, and he became my fiance. He came from Jamaica when he was 15. He got his high school diploma, but he couldn't read the damn thing because he had almost no education in Jamaica. And then, Washington, D.C. really didn't care whether he learned anything or not. So they just handed him the diploma. And he was working as a mail clerk in a basement. I think it was National Geographic. Terrible job. But had a job. And Jamaicans are hard workers. So I knew he'd work hard. And so anyway, we were together. And I wanted to help him figure out what work he could go into in the future. So I took him to a counselor that analyzed all his abilities. It gave him all these kinds of tests, IQ tests and other kind of tests. And then to try to determine what might be a good avenue for him to go into. That guy came back. I still have the paperwork on it. The guy came back and said that my fiance had a very low IQ, I think like 70. This is what a lot of times defense attorneys will say, oh my God, the kid didn't know what he was doing. He only had a 70 IQ. He was like borderline retarded. And I'm going to use the word retarded a lot just because that was a word that was used back when I was actually working with the Association for Retarded Citizens, ARC, and I had already worked with Association for Retarded Citizens. And then my husband, to be, went to this counselor and was told he was borderline retarded. He was told that he would probably be best if he worked like cleaning up parkland or maybe working in some kind of sports thing, just helping out. In other words, a very dim future for a person who was intellectually incapable of learning too much. And I remember looking at this guy because I paid like $300 for this exam. And I'm like, you're telling me, mind you, at that point in time, I was a college, I came from a fairly well-off family, and I'd been to college, and I'm like, you're telling me, and I've worked with Association for Retarded Citizens, you're telling me that my fiance that I'm about to marry is actually borderline retarded. Wouldn't you think I would notice that? Now, did I notice he was educationally deficient? Yes. Did I notice certain things? It's one of the things in the tests that they do in these places is that some of it's cultural too. Like he didn't seem to understand, I don't know, certain phases of the moon or something. But he could name like 17 oranges in Jamaica. I couldn't do that. So there were things that he didn't know that were Northern Hemisphere stuff or whatever. He's still in the North. I think it's still Northern Hemisphere, but you know what I mean? Something that was US, Canada, Europe type of concepts, and he was from the Caribbean. So it's like, yeah, we don't know crap about that. So anyway, so I was told my future was I was going to marry a man who was borderline retarded and could never make more than a very, very shallow salary. I married him anyway because I knew the guy was wrong. I helped him learn to read because he actually couldn't read he couldn't read the diploma. I actually helped him learn to read, and then I put him in touch with other people who could help him further. We were married 25 years. Very good father. Our marriage ended. But I'll tell you this, that man's made more money in his dang life than I ever made in mine. He makes six figures. He makes six figures. He worked for Siemens Medical Systems for years. And he's still making six figures. Mostly after he divorced me. But, hey, anyway, he's getting six figures. The second wife, like myself, had a master's degree and was, highly educated. She married him too. She didn't think he was borderline retarded. But what happens is in the academic system, educational system, they push people in certain places. I'm going to say he had a shitty little upbringing. He probably never read books. They probably didn't help him play games and all the things you do to raise children to be able to function in the educational system. His parents probably sucked. I don't know who they are, but I think his mother seemed a little off too. So anyway, whatever, he didn't seem like he had a great upbringing. Probably did poorly. He did poorly in school and said, screw it, left school, became a criminal. That doesn't mean he's autistic. There's no evidence he's autistic. What he is a criminal. And the guy who goes and commits a lot of crimes, in my opinion, leads me to believe he may well be psychopathic. So anyway, this guy, for a year and a half, was not in her life. He didn't raise that kid. He didn't even know he had a kid. His mommy decided she wanted a granddaughter. So this is where he and his mother got involved in her life. Now, mind you, the Bowmans that are his girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, drug addict, prostitute girl, her parents were raising this child. And I'm not going to say much good about them either. Anyway, the Bowmans were already responsible for Michelle's other two children, although the eldest son was soon removed from their home to foster care after allegedly sexually assaulting the younger one. So this is important in the sexual assault issues that he was accused of. A lot of certain homes where children have very unfortunate unfortunate circumstances. Sometimes there's a lot of sexual stuff that goes on in these homes. I had a friend who she wanted to do foster care, so she brought in a 7-year-old boy, and she thought, "Oh, I'm going to help out. I'm going to have him be part of our family." He sexually assaulted a 3-year-old. So you got to be very careful of the situations, because a lot of these kids have seen things that families who are healthy, those children don't experience that. But in these kind of situations, so we got the Bowmans. We've got their the eldest son's already removed. They're doing foster care for their daughter, but the eldest son of the daughter has already sexually assaulted another child. Personally, I think all those children should have been removed from everybody. Mere days after Nikki's birth, she was taken in for medical care, proved to be the first of many infections that plagued her throughout her life. And this is where the ear infection started. All right, when she was a few weeks old, she was the subject of a CPS investigation in which the Bowmans were identified as potential perpetrators. As part of this investigation, Nikki was subjected to a sexual assault or SANE exam due to allegations that her older half-brother, who himself had been sexually abused, might have sexually abused her. She should have been removed from that damn home. 4 days later, she was brought in to have her ears checked again. And then a month later, she was throwing up and had a fever. And her ears bothered her again. Then she was brought in for more inflamed. She had a lot of ear inflammation. That's not that's not pneumonia. That's ear inflammation. And then she was brought in with a complaint she wasn't eating very well. Well, I don't know why she wasn't eating very well. Was she not being fed very well? Was she being given crap to eat? Was she having ear infections, didn't feel like eating? I don't know. I would have removed her from that home. If a child is having repeat problems with a home that is possibly has sexual abuse in it and other kinds of abuse, remove the child and put her in a safe situation and see if all those problems vanish. If they don't vanish, then maybe the family who's taking care of it wasn't at fault. But if all those things vanish, she shouldn't go back there. Anyway, so this goes on and on and on and on. I could read through tons of these claims. All right. A few days before her ear surgery, she went and got ear surgery. Nikki was brought into Palestine Regional ER by Verna Bowman, that's her grandmother, as a result of a fall. Mrs. Bowman reportedly told hospital staff that Nikki had been in a walker, tripped and fell down some steps and hit her head on a concrete floor. That means you didn't have a baby gate. That means you weren't watching the child. I would take the child out of that home. Anyway, unidentified abnormalities were noted, whatever the hell that means. And then she got her tubes in her ears. But, okay, so then in June of 2000, CPS investigated whether the Bowmans were abusing Nikki and her half-brother. They noted that Nikki and her half-brother had been surrounded by risk their entire lives. But then they closed the investigation in July of 2000 and left her there. Then she was 9 months old on July 13th. She was brought in some episodes of vomiting. That's when she started getting Phenergan. Then in August, she was admitted again. This time, she supposedly was brought in for a choking episode. She was brought in by Verna Bowman, who said she wasn't breathing and turned blue. She was choking. What was she choking on? The choking episode does not really sound to me like this is a pneumonia. It sounds like something is happening. Apparently, there's some issue about whatever was going on in that home. All right, let me go a little further. Nikki's pediatrician wrote a letter in August saying, I would feel it would be best in Nikki's best interest she's not to have to change environment. Yeah, because her environment is so damn fine. I'm sure that little teeny child is just happy as hell there. Anyway. Okay, here we go. Okay. Then on October 7th, Mrs. Bowman directed Mrs. Roberson to sign an agreement to accept total responsibility for Nikki's safety and welfare. So now Mrs. Roberson is coming in at the 1.5 point, somewhere like that. Then a week later, Nikki was brought to the pediatrician with breathing issues again. And then there's something more about the tubes in her ears and a fever of 100, which is not big. And it goes on. All right, on February 17th, 2001, Mrs. Bowman made a note that Mrs. Roberson came to pick up Nikki for a visit with her son, Robert. Up to this point, Nikki's life, Mr. Roberson had played no role in Nikki's care. The acrimonious custody dispute between the Bowmans and Carol Roberson was still in progress. So his mommy wanted the granddaughter, and her grandparents on the other side wanted to keep her, and there was this, they were all accusing each other of doing naughty things. All right. So in March, Nikki was brought to the Palestine Regional ER by Carol Roberson, his mom, upon observing an abrasion on Nikki's forehead. Mrs. Roberson suggested she feared abuse. Nikki was diagnosed with a contusion to her head, and CPS was notified. Now, his mom brought Nikki to the ER and said she was being abused. She's pointing the finger at, not her. She's pointing the finger at the maternal grandparents, obviously. I don't know whether he was in the home. He could have given her the abrasion, and then the mom's just going to turn around and blame it on the other family. We don't know. Also, they indicated at that time she wasn't gaining weight and had visible bruises observed on the face and torso of her half-brother, Matthew, who also lived with the Bowmans. Okay, so maybe the Bowmans were beating up the kids. Who knows? Caseworker observed a knot and a bruise on Nikki's forehead and a knot on the back of her head and a bruise on her mid-back close to the spine. That's 3 bruises. Further report that Nikki had to be rushed to the hospital from the Bowman's house for choking on cigarette butts and rocks. So all these apnea things she's supposed to have. Maybe she's choking on crap that they let her put in her mouth. Unbelievable. But guess here, CPS was there. They were there to protect that child. Nevertheless, CPS summarily closed the case. So anyway. Okay, so it goes on and on and on and on and on. It's amazing. So April 2001, the Bowmans were still Nikki's primary custodians, they claimed this. Now they claimed the 17-month-old Nikki was playing with herself, and it was getting worse. Mrs. Bowman also described Nikki reaching into her diaper and pulling out fecal matter. Mrs. Bowman described Nikki patting herself on her private parts while in the bathtub or when her diapers were being changed. Mrs. Bowman described an incident during which Nikki allegedly put her hands on Mrs. Bowman's private area. And Mr. Bowman stated while changing Nikki's diaper, she had reached up and put his hand on her private parts. Mrs. Bowman also complained she felt Carolyn Roberson, his mommy, was intentionally returning Nikki after visits with the Roberson smelling of Vanilla Fields cologne, knowing that Mrs. Bowman was allergic to it. Mrs. Bowman kept a lot of diaries. Now, Mrs. Bowman is now claiming there are sexual assaults going on by him. She kept a diary of this. Now, it's hard to know whether any of that is true because obviously there are problems between the two families. One was accusing them of a physical abuse. The other one's accusing them of sexual abuse. So they were like, this child was like in the middle of this nasty bunch of people. I can't say he committed sexual abuse. That's what the Bowmans claim. I can't say that his mom was right, that the Bowmans were physically abusing the child. I don't know. Maybe it all was happening. We don't know. All right. So on April 20th, she was brought to the pediatrician by Mrs. Bowman for vomiting, and her temperature was 101. Again, Phenergan was given. Okay. Less than 2 months later, Nikki was brought in by Mrs. Bowman, this is now the girl's maternal grandparents, right? Grandmother, who reported Nikki having nightmares since March, which she suggested appeared during the week after Nikki had her Saturday visits with the Robersons. She was concerned about possible abuse. By the way, Phenergan also supposedly can cause, theoretically, if it's over-administered, Phenergan can cause hallucinations and paranoia and nightmares. So when that child was brought to his home, was an excessive amount of Phenergan given. And I'm going to keep this in mind. Sometimes when you have somebody who is left alone with a child who has never been with a child, he wasn't with that child for a year and a half. One of the most dangerous things for any child is to be left with some girl's boyfriend. Boyfriend doesn't have any great love for the kid. Kid starts screaming and crying. He gets pissed off. Over-medicates or beats the child or smothers the child. He's pretty much not really daddy material. He's like that boyfriend, that really didn't want to spend time with the kid. So yeah, okay. So he's got a cute picture here holding the baby. That is meaningless. He wasn't really in her life. Maybe he did love her. I don't know, but maybe overdose of Phenergan was given at a high level so that this child was having nightmares, paranoia, whatever. Can I say that's true? No, I can't, because everybody is telling the truth, and everybody is abusing that child, or they're all just lying. I don't know which one it is. So then Mrs. Bowman was referred to a social worker, and they began to have play sessions. They never found any evidence she was sexually abused. So keep that in mind. The social worker never found that. So maybe the Bowmans were just lying and trying to set him up, right? Okay. And then she went back to the pediatrician. She had a history of urinary tract infections. That's kind of weird. Sometimes that's connected with sexual abuse, but all right. Next month, in August, she was admitted to Palestine Regional with a diagnosis of abuse. She'd been brought in by Carolyn Roberson. Now his mother brings her in, says that when they picked her up from the grandparents' house, the maternal grandparents, that she had a black eye and an abrasion on her mouth. CPS was notified. This is August 25th. Nothing ever happened, even though she had looked like she was punched an eye, and nothing happened, because a week later, she was admitted to Palestine Regional for fever and nausea, brought in by the Bowmans. It's like, can you see how this poor child? I mean, good Lord Almighty. Anyway, they gave her Phenergan suppositories and also some I don't know, something supplement. It says cut long ways every 6 hours for nausea and vomiting. So this Phenergan, I guess you could cut it in half or something, half of, And then she was also given a suppository. Keep the suppository in mind. There was some thought when that child was brought to the hospital comatose, that there was some evidence of some kind of anal trauma, which they looked at as possible sexual trauma. It could just be trying to shove a suppository in her butt. Okay. All right. And then there's more earaches. And then a week later, she got more ears. Temperature was 100. Most of all of this, as you can see, almost everything is connected to the ear. Now, you can come back later and say, oh my God, she had undiagnosed pneumonia in her lungs, and that's what caused the fevers. But as far as we can see, every time the pain in the ear goes up, the fever goes up. And that's very normal for some children with severe ear problems. I personally don't buy the pneumonia thing. I buy the ear thing. All right. So anyway, more appointments. Oh, this is interesting. That's what this is. Around mid-November 2001, Roberson formally obtained custody of Nikki as a result of the Bowmans said, oh, screw it, take the kid. She's a pain. Anyway, that's not what they said, but all right. And at this point, Nikki was 2 years old. According to Larry Bowman, he and his wife had never had any trouble with Mr. Roberson after they reported he had probably sexually assaulted her and had seen no feeling that he didn't want his baby. But Nikki did not move in with her father, who was then living in a small rental house with his then girlfriend, Teddy Cox, and her daughter, and was supporting them, relying solely on income from 2 paper routes. Well, I don't know how you support people on paper routes, but all right. I'm going to say there was probably criminal enterprise outside of those paper routes that was paying for the other things that they needed. Nikki continued to be shuffled back between the 2 sets of grandparents. I didn't know there was okay. I hear about his mother. I never heard about a father. I don't know who that 2 sets of grandparents were. I don't know if they're just talking about the 2 Bowmans, which were married people, and his mother. I don't know what that means, because I never heard about his father being around or any grandfather being around on his side. Okay, now she comes in for coughing and congestion, and she has a rash on her butt and some evidence of peeling around the anus and vulva. That just could be somebody doesn't change their diapers enough. Okay, January, she's staying with her grandmother, Carolyn Roberson. During that time, she had a fever and diarrhea that was concerning enough for Mrs. Roberson, along with Nikki's father, Mr. Roberson, to take Nikki to the emergency room. Now, when they say that, it's hard to say whether he wanted to take the kid to the emergency room. Mom says, we're going to the emergency room. And her temperature was 103. She was given Phenergan suppositories again and Imodium. Amount is not clear on the records. Okay. And afterwards, Nikki was taken to the Bowmans while Mr. Roberson picked up Nikki's prescriptions. Why do you have to drop the kid off at her grandparents to pick up prescriptions? I don't get it. Mind you, again, this is all from the defense. This is not the prosecution. Next day, the Bowmans took Nikki to the pediatrician's office, and she had a high fever. This is where the 104, January 29th, she had a fever of 104. They thought, I didn't know what the heck might be the problem, so he gave her Phenergan again and sent her home. The next night, on January 30th, Mrs. Bowman called Mr. Roberson and asked him to pick Nikki up and take her to his house, although she was still sick. At the time, well, now they're saying she was still sick. At the time, Mr. Roberson was at the hospital where he had been staying overnight with his girlfriend who had just had a hysterectomy. Okay, so theoretically, she was still sick. I don't know what that means. She had 100 fever, she had 101 fever, or whatever. Don't know. This is very, very, this is missing a lot of information. And it's from the defense. Mr. Roberson arrived at the Bowman's house around 9:30 p.m. to retrieve his sick daughter. Although they knew Nikki was sick, that Mr. Roberson's girlfriend was in the hospital, that he had never had sole responsibility of Nikki. Oh my God. Okay. Pay attention. He's never been alone with his daughter ever. His mother has always been taking care of her. First time he's ever been alone with his daughter. And this is where the danger comes in. And this is where it's going to be part of my analysis of what I actually think really happened. So anyway, he drove out, picked up the kid. They also pointed out that Nikki always slept in the same bed with Mr. and Mrs. Bowman. Okay, now I am all for the family bed, but if I'm under pressure from the CPS and stuff, I would put her in a separate bed. Just saying. All right. Just because you get accused of things. Mrs. Bowman claimed that he arrived around 9:30. He was real polite and sat visiting with them for a while. I've also heard from other sources that he was nasty. So again, this is a defense version. Mrs. Bowman agreed that it was always the way it was with Mr. Roberson, that she did not want to leave with him that night. She didn't want to go with him. Probably because she hardly knew him. A man comes to pick her up from the house she mostly lives in. That's kind of creepy and scary for a little 2-year-old. Yet Mrs. Bowman urged the sick child to leave with her father anyway because she wasn't feeling well. Although her husband was there. Similarly, Larry Bowman testified that Nikki did not want to go with Mr. Roberson that night, and he assumed that she didn't want to be away from him and his wife. But instead, he shoved her in the car and told her, too bad. All right, now we get to what happened. What are the claims of what happened? At around 5 a.m. the next morning, Mr. Roberson was awoken by a strange cry. Now, mind you, they were sleeping in the same bed. He doesn't ever say that before they went to bed that she had a very high fever, that she was crying, that she couldn't breathe. He never said anything about that. But at 5 in the morning, he claims that he was woken by a strange cry, and he found Nikki lying on the floor at the foot of the bed. The bed consisted of mattress and box springs that he had raised up 2 layers with cinder blocks. The idea was his girlfriend was coming back, and he wanted it high enough so she could sit on it, as opposed to having to lay on a mattress on the floor. So he supposedly put cinder blocks up and put the box spring up so that it would be like a bed. And I don't have any problem with this. A lot of people don't have a lot of money. Apparently, he didn't have a lot of money. And I mean, when I first had my first daughter, I was in California, and we were kind of poor at that moment. And I slept on a mattress on the floor. And I went into labor on the floor. Actually, I didn't have the mattress. I think I just went to labor on the floor. I didn't have the mattress. What am I thinking? No, actually, I was just sleeping on the floor on a blanket. I went into labor. And after I came home from the hospital, my husband told me, "Hey, stay here long enough so I can get something to sleep on." He came back. When I came back home, there was a couch with like a depressed area. One of the areas like somebody gave it to him, and there was a single bed and a bassinet. And my husband and I and the baby slept on the single bed. The toys were in the bassinet, and I nursed, and so the baby was with me. And then Or's on his chest. And it was a very small. And then we got the mattress for the floor. Then we could move into some larger area on the floor. So, people look at people who are poorer and they say, oh my God, they're being abusive toward the kids. No, they're not. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. That just because you don't have a fancy bed that you bought for $2,000, if you're laying on something, you're laying on something. Okay, so he made this for his girlfriend, I think that's perfectly fine. And he's sleeping with a baby, so that tells me there's no other bed for the baby, nor is there a crib. Is that a terrible thing or not? Well, first of all, my problem is that supposedly the baby was being taken care of by his mother for all of this time, and suddenly the baby's with him alone, not even his girlfriend there. So he alone, who's never taken care of a baby, is now in possession of a 2-year-old child who is possibly sick, has ear infections, which means you might have a screaming, unhappy child who might be scared to be with you and also in pain. Not a good idea. All right. Claims after he found her lying on the floor, he picked her up off the floor. He saw a little blood on her mouth and a bruise on her chin. He wiped the blood off with a wet rag, and that's the blood on the rag that the detective was given. Because she appeared to be okay, he put her back into bed and kept up talking for a while. Now, the claim has changed on this, by the way. First of all, he said they talked for 2 hours about family and friends, and I'm like, what 2-year-old does all that for 2 hours? That didn't seem sensible to me. But anyway, another time he didn't seem to say anything about them talking that much. But then they fell asleep again. When the alarm later woke him up at 9 a.m., Mr. Roberson found Nikki unconscious and blue. He was scared. He called his girlfriend, Teddy Cox, who had more experience with children, at the hospital. He told Ms. Cox that Nikki had fallen out of bed and would not wake up, and he asked what he should do. She told him to get Nikki to the hospital. He then called Mrs. Bowman to tell her to meet him at the hospital, telling her that Nikki had fallen off the bed and hit her head. Ms. Cox called Mr. Roberson back and told him to hurry up after Mr. Roberson told her that Nikki wasn't breathing and he couldn't get her to wake up. Okay, I have issues right here. There's another location, and I don't know the accuracy of this, which says he did not call his girlfriend at the hospital, that she had called him for the ride to the hospital. Right home from the hospital. So she had called him and said, hey, Robert, I need to, I'm being discharged. I need to ride home from the hospital. And he said, oh, by the way, my little girl's lying is unconscious and not breathing. That's the other story. This is the defense version, that he called her because he didn't know what to do. What do you notice is missing from this thing? You wake up and you find your girl is blue. You would think you would call 911. If you can call his girlfriend and chit chat, oh, what do you think I should do? I should do this. More time is being. Why don't you call 911? Please, don't mind you. Palestine is a very tiny place. And this is about the time I was there 20 years ago. I was in Palestine. Palestine had 3 major ways to make money. You worked at the hospital, you worked at the prison, or you worked at the sheriff's department. Like, those were the 3. There was like one restaurant in town, which had great Texas fried steak, mind you. Everybody took me to that restaurant because it was like the restaurant. It's a very small place. And as you're driving in, there's a sign that says, warning, hitchhikers may be escaping prisoners. I guess it was a small town. There wasn't much to do there. So it's small. It's not that far to the hospital, no matter where you live. So why wouldn't he call 911 and ask them to send an ambulance out or get some help? Like, what should I do? Why would he call his girlfriend? Because she got it. Oh, hi, honey. I know you need. That makes no sense to me. I believe the other version, that his daughter was just lying there blue, and he's like, oh, I don't know. And so the girlfriend called him and said, what's up? I need a ride. And he goes, yeah, by the way, I probably need to come to the hospital anyway, because my daughter's like lying here unconscious and blue, and she won't wake up. He didn't call 911. I don't know that he even called his girlfriend. That bothers me tremendously. The other thing that bothers me tremendously is that they said there was toxic amount of phenergan in her system. Now, when you are alone with a child for the first time in your life, and the child is in pain, screaming, or just scared, the problem with little children that age is they won't shut the hell up. The one thing that saves children from being murdered is love. Because when you look at that child who won't shut up, you say to yourself, Thank God I love you, or I would want to throw you against the wall. But I love you. So that'll save you. But a man who has no real connection to the child, either a boyfriend or a father who's never been with that child and probably has never even knew the child existed. That child is a screaming little banshee. It's very annoying, extremely annoying. And the one thing you want to do is shut that kid the hell up. That's where the shaken baby thing comes in too, because they thought he was doing that to shut her up. But also, there's a number of ways to shut her up. And the other way to shut her up is to give her more Phenergan than she needs, which may be the point of that toxic dose. How good is he at giving medicine to kids? They told him to give him half, maybe give her whole, maybe give her two. I don't know, because they don't even have the details. The toxicology, I can't find the toxicology report, and they're not going to admit the toxicology report. So he may have overdosed that child. That may be why she's out. Now, he says later on, when she wouldn't wake up, he did say he shook her and slapped her twice on the face. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible he overdosed her. And when he realized what he'd done, he tried to wake her up by shaking her and slapping her. Whether the shaking and slapping caused her death or whether the overdose caused her death is questionable. The other possibility, which is where the sexual assault could come in, possibly, is that sometimes when you're trying to sexually assault a child and they're objecting to it, there's a number of things you do. Put your hand over their face, press down on their face. It causes bruising on the chin. Could be, you could take that. You could slap her a couple of times to tell her to shut the heck up. She could bite herself. You take the washcloth, you put it over her face because you want her to shut the hell up while you sexually assault. That could be true too. Or there could be no sexual assault, but just she's screaming so damn much, you slapping her and trying to shut her the hell up. She had a bruise to the back of the head, which the prosecution never believed came from falling on that floor. They believed that she was probably slammed. So there were multiple areas of what appeared to be where she was hit, and there was a swelling here, which did not appear to be from just shaking her. That's when they say, oh my God, he was convicted on just shaking baby syndrome, and that's been disproven. That is nothing in the conclusion of the court or the jury was based on shaken baby. It was based on possible shaken baby and actual physical assault. That there was, therefore, more than the shaken baby thing. So there are three possibilities. A shaken baby, which could do something, and the fact that she was then actually assaulted, and had traumatic injury from the assault, and also an overdose from the toxic levels of Phenergan in her system. So those are three possibilities, and all three are possible at the same time. And what they're trying to claim is she only died of a misdiagnosed, undiagnosed pneumonia, and he was misunderstood as being autistic. But that is not why he got convicted by that jury. He got convicted by that jury because they believe he hurt her. I don't think the toxic thing even, I didn't see anything about the jury even ruminating over the toxic issue. I saw that and I couldn't believe that wasn't part of the actual case. They believed that he harmed her in either a sexual assault or for whatever other reasons. I am not convinced of the sexual assault. Now, the nurse Kelly, let's look at what the nurse said. And the first nurse saw her. She was visibly blue from oxygen deprivation, appeared to be dead. The nurse, Kelly Greganis, saw minimal bruising on her face, but she described the bruise she saw looking like a handprint. She saw no black eye, no sign she'd been struck with a fist, so she wasn't punched. No blood in her hair, no sign of broken bones. But there was damage here and what looked like a handprint here, and also at the back of the head. So let's see. Let's see a few more things here. The nurse Sims, she thought she saw some anal tears. She thought indicated sexual abuse. And again, I could be just a suppository. You're trying to put a suppository up a kid's butt, and you've never done it before. I don't know. Was a suppository up the kid's butt? I don't know any of this because it's not in here. Could he be sexually abusing her? Sure. His girlfriend was unavailable. She was getting hysterectomy. I don't trust this guy. I think he's a career criminal. I don't think he's autistic. I think he's more likely psychopathic. So whether he cares about his kid or whether he might find his kid useful for a little sexual fun, I don't know. The nurse thought she might have been sexually abused, and it was questionable. So I guess it went to court, and it was considered by the jury. But whether the jury determined he was guilty of sexual assault or not, I don't see that. No visible blood cuts or abrasions on her head, except for that chin thing. Nurse Sims noted on the back of her head it felt soft and boggy. There was a goose egg back here, pooling of blood under the scalp. There was no sign of a skull fracture, however. He did show them where she fell, supposedly, and he showed her the washcloth. So now they're saying, well, that makes him an innocent guy because he showed them around and showed them washcloth. That's not true. A person who's a psychopath who did stuff to his kid will show you whatever he thinks won't get him in trouble. That's pretty meaningless. I agree that there's no proof that she was beaten or thrown into a wall, or she wasn't like coming in with like broken bones everywhere. I agree with that. I totally agree with that. But he did say he slapped her on her face. And he grabbed her face and shook her to wake her up, and then slapped her in the face. He doesn't say he tapped her on the face. He said he slapped her, which concerns me, because there is a great difference between hey, wake up, then slapping. Slapping to me means anger, and that's why I wonder whether that slapping. Here's something that a person will do when they're explaining away what they did. They will take an event that happened before, and they'll move it to after. So let's say before that she wasn't functioning. Now think about this. He gives her too much drugs, or she's screaming her little butt off. And he said, I crawled up on the bed and I grabbed her face and I shook her and I slapped her a couple of times. That could have happened before anything else happened to her. He could have done that to her either because she was screaming and he couldn't take it anymore, or she was overdosed. And now what he does is he moves that event to later. I found her unconscious. So then I shook her to wake her up and I slapped her on the face. You can move one event to another and come across sounding pretty reasonable. But I think the event came before. At the time they checked her out, they found no pneumonia, nothing. It was a pneumonia or edema. Let's see what else here. And the Dr. Squires said she was considered terminal because of inflicted head trauma, and then issues, laceration to anus and tears seen, shaken baby, or impact head trauma. But they didn't find any significant bruising in an anal exam, but there was a small laceration. Again, could have been from the shoving that thing up her, or trying to shove something else up her. She was pronounced dead on February 1st after a brain death protocol was initiated, and he was arrested that day. So that's basically it. She had blunt force trauma to the back of her head. They put together shaken baby syndrome and blunt force trauma to the back of the head, whether it was hit or whether she was slammed. And that's what caused the trauma to the back of her head, but blunt force trauma. And what about that toxic amount of phenergan in her system? All right, so the state posited that Nikki's death was caused by an intentional infliction of a combination of violent shaking and battery that was attributed to Mr. Roberson, that guy there. And no witnesses before he supposedly found her unconscious, took her to Palestine Regional. And the testimony from medical providers, that was what was presented in court, and that's how he got nailed for it. Now, what do I think? Do I think it was a premeditated homicide? No, I do not. I do not think so at all. I don't think he tried to kill his daughter or wanted to kill his daughter. Murder one to me is off the table. However, she is a little child and she deserves protection. One possibility is that he couldn't stand the crying. The sexual stuff, it's possible. I don't see any great proof of it. Like I say, the anal stuff could just be the suppository. I don't have great faith in that. So I'm going to take off murder one, premeditated off the table. I'll also take off a sexual assault because I don't think that's proven. So now we're down to two things: crying baby that drove you nuts, and you try to shut her the hell up, either by closing her face, doing this. And by the way, children, it's very hard to prove why when a child is suffocated. It's very hard to prove an autopsy. So oftentimes it's just when they're real young, they just call it SIDS. Now there are certainly children who die of SIDS. Their parents didn't touch them and do anything wrong to them. But there's quite a few homicides that are labeled SIDS because they can't prove that that the child actually was smothered. So it's just like, okay, SIDS, and the person gets away with it. If she was screaming up a storm and he couldn't take it anymore, I don't think he purposely killed her, but I think he may have tried to shut her up by putting his hand over her mouth, and getting very grabby, and that's what caused the abrasion. That's what caused her not to breathe. And maybe he actually slapped her a couple of times and shut up, and then he tried to. So was he abusive? Yes. If that's the reason the child died, he would have been abusive. She's a crying child, and no matter how much a child cries, you don't have the legal right to abuse your child and smother her to death. If she was crying and that's what he did to her, then he did indeed kill her. Maybe not intentionally, but he did kill her. The second possibility is that he overdosed her with the Phenergan. And when he overdosed her, he freaked out because she obviously wasn't functioning after he overdosed her. So he started grabbing her and slapping her around, all that crap, trying to excessively wake her up, and it didn't work. So either he tried to shut her up because she wouldn't stop crying, or he overdosed her and tried to wake her up. Both times he did kill her. And if he overdosed her on the Phenergan, there's people who do that and they don't really understand dosage that much. So you get some. I don't think he's stupid, but some people just act stupid. They're just not familiar with stuff. They're like, oh, she's supposed to give away. I'll give a couple of mil, shut her up. Didn't mean to do it, but did it. If that's true, then I think it's manslaughter. If he wanted to shut her the hell up, and it was abusive doing it, that is more homicide, regular homicide, but second degree, not first, not murder one. Do I think he killed her? The answer to that is yes. I do think he was responsible for her death. How? And the fact he didn't call 911 tells me that he knows he's responsible for her death and he doesn't know what to do about it. Regardless of whether you're for the death penalty or not for the death penalty, I don't think he should have gotten the death penalty. And I think he should have gotten either, I said, something less than first degree murder. The child, he shouldn't have had that child in his custody alone. He shouldn't have. He had nobody had any business. I blame social services more than anybody else in this whole damn thing. The social services didn't do anything right by this child. They left that child in the care of one. Every single person shouldn't have had the care of her. She should have been taken away from everybody. Of course, there's legal things. Now he's really the father. He gets the right. But that guy had no ability to care for a child. So I would have recommended way less than the death penalty, in spite of the fact a poor child died. I would have. I wouldn't have And I am not necessarily against the death penalty, but I just don't think he deserved the death penalty because I don't think it's premeditated. I don't think sexual assault was proven. So I will agree for once that this is one of the cases where people say he should not be executed. I agree he should not be executed. I agree with that. But it pisses me off that the Innocence Project again is saying he's innocent. I don't see that he is innocent. I think he's guilty of killing his child. It's how he killed his child, which I think has not been proven to be a premeditated murder or a sexual assault or a murder committed during a sexual assault. It could have been, I mean, he could be covering up her mouth while he's trying to sexual assault her and killed her. That's not proven, in my opinion. It's just not proven. I think it's more likely she's screaming and crying and that was what happened, or he overdosed her. One of those two. And I don't think he deserved the death penalty on that. So I will agree, I don't think he should be executed. But I am 100% still against the Innocence Project because they don't ever tell the truth. And there's no proof he was autistic. There's no proof that he was found guilty just on shaken baby. That is not true. He was not found guilty just on shaken baby. That's a lie. They lie about a lot of things to get people out of prison and get them out of the death penalty. And I continually say, if you want me to respect your organization, then you should be an honorable organization, and you're not. And the media, of course, has jumped on this and, oh, they're executing an autistic man on junk science. That is not true. That is not true. They're executing a man, in my opinion, based on probably an exaggeration of motive. That's the part that bothers me. That he should get an appeal. If he got an appeal, I would be happy about that. Get an appeal that says, let's prove that he either, that he overdosed her or that he just tried to stop her from crying. And maybe he's already done 20 years. Maybe that's acceptable. Do I think he's a nice guy? No. I don't like criminals. I don't like career criminals. And I think he's probably more likely psychopathic anywhere near autistic. So he's not somebody I like. But on the other hand, I like charges to be appropriate. And I think that he was overcharged. So that's my whole view on this case. And I know I took you through a lot, but I want you to understand this is all the stuff you never hear about. And when I go through bit by bit by bit, I want you to understand how things work and how things, what the reality of things are, rather than I could do this in 10 minutes. And then everybody will be happy because they don't have to listen to me for very long. And they go, oh, see, Pat Brown. No, I don't want you just to know what I think. I want you to understand what I'm saying and understand this, because whatever I say here can apply to many other cases as well. My purpose is to educate and to help any future case. Are we looking at this correctly? Or are we confused over it? Or are we over-exaggerating? Or do we not understand how people behave? Do we not understand that crying babies drive people nuts? Do we not understand that people can overdose a child very easily? And why do we have not the facts of this case the way the facts of the case should be? So that's why I explain things to the level I do, because I think it's important for people to understand. So anyway, that's it. I don't know what's going to happen to the guy in a couple of weeks, but I hope people will listen to this, to my this particular video, and try to understand more than any place. I will guarantee you, I think, that I have now explained more about this case than you will ever get from any other media outlet, because they don't care about facts and understanding. They don't. They care about whatever agenda it is, whatever will get, whatever will be most popular. And that's not why I do this channel. So anyway, thank you for being here. Again, if you're new to the channel, please do like and subscribe. Check my playlists and check my other cases. I've done a bunch of other, if I remember to link below, I will, other cases where supposedly there's junk science that got somebody convicted, and it's just not true. I've looked at a lot of Innocence Project cases, and most of them I come up with, they're lying like dogs, the Innocence Project, and the person is guilty as hell, and they deserve whatever they get. whether you think they deserve life in prison or whether they deserve death penalty, regardless, they deserve to never be in public again, out in society again. This is a rare case where I think they overcharged. But it doesn't mean I like the Innocence Project anymore, any more than I ever did, because they're still liars. And so is the media. They just don't tell you the truth because it just frustrates me. Anyway, I'll shut up. Thank you for being here, and let's see what happens.